Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Cabinet in Croydon. It is 6:30. We've just got a slight delay. I'll give it a minute to see if the Shadow Cabinet are joining us, which is protocol, but it's very much direct. Maria's joined us. Welcome, Maria. So, if we could take our seats quickly, because we are. No, the Crocus. Well, the Crocus is a very positive story. The Crocus is for Croydon, indeed. I hope you've all got a bag of bulbs to take home and plant. Okay, so we're now ready to crack on with the agenda. So the Part A minutes of the Cabinet on the 13th of July, they agreed. Thank you. The apologies for absence, Jim.
Leader, I've received an apology for absence from Councillor Dudley Mead.
Thank you very much indeed, Jim. Disclosures of interest, I'll assume they are. Councillor Pollard.
Apologies also from Councillor O'Connell.
Thank you very much.
You had that one.
If we could then, having noted those, the disclosures of interest agenda item 3, I'll assume that they are, as been noted by members, or any updates will have been put in place. Urgent items, there isn't any. Exempt items, can we agree the allocation of business between Part A and B? Thank you very much indeed. Which moves us on to the Council's autumn financial statement. Some very serious challenges facing this Council and local government across the board, regardless of party, in terms of the cuts from central government. And I'd like to start, if I may, colleagues, with a quote. Leaving councils to pick up the bill for new national policies while being handed further spending reductions cannot be an option. Enormous pressures will be heaped on already stretched local services if the government fails to fully assess the impact of those unfunded cost burdens when making its spending decisions for the next 5 years. Vital services such as caring for the elderly, protecting children, collecting bins, filling potholes and maintaining our parks and green spaces will simply struggle to continue at current levels. They're not my words, colleagues, they are the words of Councillor Gary Porter, the newly appointed elected Conservative leader of the Local Government Association nationally, but I know he speaks for many across local government. And the context of which we're looking at this paper tonight is in with over 40% of cuts to local government, including Croydon, from central government in the last 4 to 5 years. This Labour administration inherited a self-confessed £100 million fiscal black hole from the outgoing Conservative administration last year, as quoted by Councillor Fisher in the Croydon Advertiser on the 31st of May 2014. Since we inherited that, I am pleased to say we got the Council's finances under control. We did deliver a balanced budget and a council tax freeze, as we said we would do in the election last year, and that was against a backdrop of council tax going up an appalling 14.7% during the years of the previous administration. So we have got huge challenges. Much of this is recognised across local government. I want to place on the record my thanks to all the MPs in the borough who are working hard to lobby on some specific issues, not least the appalling in-year cut we've seen in terms of the unaccompanied asylum seekers of £4 million, and we welcome that. I also welcome Councillor Pollard as the leader of the opposition agreeing to sign a joint letter with me with the final wording to be agreed to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury in terms of highlighting the inherent unfairness, I think, even within this tough financial backdrop of what we have, what we're dealing with here in Croydon. So putting huge pressures on our services. We very much said as an administration that we won't allow a Tory cuts agenda to public services dictate the future of Croydon, which is why we've driven the growth zone agenda, why we've driven the drives for jobs, new housing, affordable housing, the London living wage, expansion of trams and tubes, etc., because we recognise that local government has to increasingly shape the place it represents and take the lead in very much setting the agenda for what is essentially the 7th largest city in this country, so that we ensure the people of Croydon have the best opportunity in terms of training, the work we're doing with the college, etc., to take the town forward in the years ahead, despite the cuts. Having said that, we are charged as an administration with setting a budget against the cuts agenda next February, and that's what we're very much discussing tonight. And at that point, I'd like to hand over to Councillor Simon Hall, our Cabinet Member leading on finance, and Richard Simpson, in charge of the Council's finances. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Leader. There's a presentation that will come up for everyone to see. What we want to do is take Cabinet through the context in which we're viewing the figures, the policy changes that have happened over the last few months since the budget was set, and what we're doing as an administration to tackle those throughout the Council. So that's the areas we're going to cover in terms of the first areas of the forecast for the current year and what we have seen over the last few years in terms of grant and demand. I'm going to hand over to Richard.
Thank you, Councillor Hall. So, just in terms of the current year's budget, I sat before Cabinet back in February of this year and talked about the budget we were setting for this financial year. Over £20 million of savings were needed to be delivered in the backdrop of a difficult budget for the previous year and significantly rising demand for a number of our services. I set out that there was significant risk that we had to manage in the delivery of that budget. At that point in February, and when Council signed off the budget later in February, we weren't aware at that point of a number of grant funding changes that Councillor Hall will cover later in the presentation and are detailed in the report. So the cut to our unaccompanied asylum grant, the cut to our adult learning grant and the cut to our public health grant, none of those were known when we signed up, or you signed up as the Council, to the budget for this financial year. Considering all that change and considering the challenges being faced in a number of our services, the forecast overspend as at Q1 set out in the table on the slide of £3.163 million is not significantly different from the challenges we've faced over the last 2 years. You'll see set out there overspend forecasts of between 2 and 3 million, and when we came to Cabinet in July at the last meeting, an overspend forecast of 3.9 million. This slide was presented in the budget report back in February to Cabinet as well. So the story of local government since 2010 is significant grant loss year on year and making a huge percentage contribution to the government's deficit recovery programme. This is forecast to continue at a similar rate out to 2019 based on the government's public spending figures already published, and we'll obviously find out more when the spending review is published later in November. The story of grant loss alone isn't the story for Croydon. The rising demand for our services is the one that's making it so difficult for this Council to balance its budget year on year. The slide on the screen sets out something called damping, which is part of the formula system. Dampening was intended to smooth out year on year changes in need. It means boroughs like Croydon year on year are being given less money than the government calculates we need. The system was frozen in 2013-14, and this sets out the forecast loss for Croydon out on the right of that graph you'll see of cumulatively over those 8 years over 50 million, and sets out the benefit for inner London boroughs such as Wandsworth, Camden and K&C, over 150 million over those 8 years. So this system takes no account of population increase since 2013. It takes no account of demographic change since 2013, including the ageing population. If you look at the funding per head across London, you see that Kensington and Chelsea, £572 per head, Westminster, £653 per head, Camden, over £650 per head, compared to £337 per head for Croydon. also that issue of damping built into the system, the significant population increase we're experiencing in Croydon and other parts of outer London, and that demographic shift, and whether it's the elderly population or those moving out from inner London to outer London where they can better afford to live. This has seen significant increases in the cost of services within the People Department. The report sets out in some detail the 3 or 4 areas where we're struggling to manage that demand against the budget set, despite a number of measures being put in place to try and manage that demand. So on homelessness, adult social care and SEN transport. And it's not just the council experiencing those pressures. Other parts of the public sector in Croydon, such as the NHS and police, are also experiencing that increase in demand and the impact that has on their services. So I'll hand back to Councillor Hall to cover the rest of the... Oh, one more slide, sorry. So just on temporary accommodation, just some numbers to set out the impact since 2011. So more than doubling the impact of number of households in temporary accommodation, and also the impact on expenditure, because that's not quite pro rata to the change in demand. We're also seeing the issue of the increasing difference between an average market rent in Croydon and the amount paid by the local housing allowance, meaning the burden on the council, beyond the burden on housing benefit, is getting more and more each year. So that funded by the local council taxpayer, over 6 million now in the current year's forecast. Now, over to Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Richard. I think it's important to understand the policy changes that we've seen since the budget was set in February. I'm going to deal in a moment in more detail with unaccompanied asylum seeker children and welfare benefit changes. But in public health, in July, we saw an announcement that there was going to be a cut of £200 million in public health across the country. The formula for this has still not been published by central government, but if, as expected, is its top sliced, that's a £1.3 million loss in year for the services that do so much, or can do so much, to improve the health, quality of life and life expectancy of our population. In Calat, at the end of July, they received a letter saying that for the current academic year, starting on 1st of September, a £600,000 cut was being made to the funding. Calat provides services for those looking to get work, looking to be able to be included in their society by reducing language barriers, looking to upskill so that they can make the best of their lives. These are the services that are potentially at risk by this significant cut. In parking, we saw at the end of March an announcement of the change to the rules about enforcement by CCTV, which has an impact of well over £500,000 due to that lost income. And then in the emergency budget, we saw the change to the formula on housing rent. In fact, we saw central government dictate the level of rent rises purely to try and reduce the housing benefit bill, not for any other reason. That obliges us for the next 4 years to have a 1% absolute reduction in the level of housing rents, as opposed to the working assumption that central government had indicated before then, which was CPI plus 1%. That, over the 30-year business plan of the HRA, has a £430 million effect. So again, £430 million. So all these changes make the already challenging budget much more difficult to deliver. Now, I want to go through 2 of those key changes in a bit more detail. For unaccompanied asylum seeker children, just before I do this, it's worth noting that because of our status as a gateway authority, we actually account for 1/4 of government expenditure on unaccompanied asylum seeker children nationally. We're nearly twice the next borough, Kent, over 4 times the borough that comes after that, which is Hillingdon. So any changes to the system on unaccompanied asylum seeker children has a disproportionate effect on this borough, and this at a time when we are seeing a very great increase in the number of children that are being cared for. So we've seen cuts in the rates, which will mean a £4 million loss of income if that is maintained. And that was sent in late March with no discussion with officers, with no information being supplied, just a unilateral act by a Home Office minister. Obviously, in terms of our spend, we can't change that overnight. And if we were to look for much cheaper options for those children, we would then potentially be putting at risk or certainly reducing the quality of care that the over 450 young people who have been through so much in their lives already receive. And we have seen since April a 17% increase in the number of unaccompanied asylum seeker children. So this cut in the rate, with all the implications that has for infrastructure and finding the right foster carers and so on and so forth, is being done when we're seeing that sort of increase. Indeed, Conservative Kent has basically said they can no longer cope, they can no longer take any more unaccompanied asylum seeker children. That's their cabinet member who said that within the last 2 weeks on Radio 4. So, that's the impact we're seeing in terms of huge numbers, and we're seeing the rates being cut. In addition to that, the no recourse to public fund costs that the council currently has, again, significantly due to Home Office not dealing with young people properly, is totally unfunded and currently costs the council some £5 million per year. It's also worth saying that there are other cost implications unfunded. The number of unaccompanied asylum seeker children we have, almost invariably of school age, is the equivalent to a 2-form-entry school, and we know what one of those costs to build. Moving to welfare changes, the benefit cap changes that have been voted through by the Conservative government is estimated to impact 955 Croydon families. This is a lot more actually than the original benefits cap, and is we already know the impact that had for a lot of families and the amount of work the council had to do to assist those families. This will be much greater. In addition, the tax credit changes that come in on 1st of April have huge implications for the services. To be clear, a working family on low income with children will see a £25 per week reduction in the level of their tax credits from 1st of April. This is huge. Now, a direct impact of this is that families who do not currently qualify for council tax support or only have a low level of council tax support will have an increased entitlement, and based on the current scheme that will have a direct impact of 1.2 million. However, the demand on other services that this could lead to in terms of things like homelessness, safeguarding and all sorts of other services is huge in addition to that. So, what do we already have in hand? As you heard from the leader, we were committed to growing this borough and seeing it change its image and go from strength to strength. So whether it's Westfield Hammerson, whether it's the various regeneration projects in other parts of the borough, whether it's the programme to drive through housing, as is facilitated by what we'll see later on the local plan, whether it's the Ambition Festival and the investment in culture, whether it's the cycle race through the town centre, in all sorts of different areas, we're growing the borough and changing its image. This increases jobs, this increases the wealth of the borough, and will also, in due course, help the council's finances by doing so. We already had in place a series of Croydon Challenge projects. I wanted to just highlight 3. One is digital enabling, changing the way we do business internally, but also the way that we interact with residents to make things 24/7 through digital, make things easier for residents, but also drive through efficiencies through the organisation. Think Family Project, which is about a whole programme of looking holistically at families rather than in the traditional silos, and therefore delivering a better result for those families, but also actually at less cost. Asset management, where we're seeing in terms of using underutilised buildings, sort of much better looking at where we can have housing on particular council-owned sites, looking at where we can rent space out, like we have been doing in places like Davis House, and other deals that we're currently looking at to actually make the best use of our assets. We've massively changed the approach to procurement, commissioning and contract management to hold suppliers like Capita and Veolia properly to account, and to make sure that our contracts give us the levers and the flexibility that we need in this changing world. And as was set out in the budget papers back in February, we've focused our drive in terms of efficiencies and cost reductions and cuts on back office to preserve the front line. So, faced with the new challenges that we've just gone through due to central government decisions over the last few months, what have we done? Because we're not going to just sit there and let a crisis happen. We're in control, and we will carry on to combat these challenges so that we deliver to the people of Croydon. So we put extra controls on recruitment. We're reviewing all interim staff, and there are a lot of interim staff who therefore will either have or will be leaving. We're reviewing all income and charges that the council has in place to make sure that they're equitable and look where we can make appropriate changes. We've put additional government measures on social care placements, particularly adult social care, where we had concerns about whether we were going to deliver that in terms of best value. We are looking, as we'll, I'm sure, come on to later, to introduce charges for the discretionary service of collection of green card and waste. A parking review to bring in a more equitable system of parking charges and move away from the current complex and inconsistent system we have. A review on our approach to school places, where we are still having to put tens of millions of the council's money into building the schools for the number of children we see coming into our schools and needing school places, because government is not funding us appropriately, and looking whether we can limit the expenditure to the amount of grant that we get for school places. And then across all the Croydon Challenge initiatives, looking at what we can do to accelerate their implementation to deliver results for the people of Croydon and preserve frontline services. This is obviously a very serious situation. We are an administration that is taking on the front foot in terms of tackling these issues so that we can deliver to the people of Croydon. Thank you.
So some huge challenges, but ones we're determined to confront. But I think the significant change, if not quite unprecedented, that we've seen this year is something that has taken this, I think, to a new level. Because the council, in good faith, along with many others, but we set a formal budget at the end of February, and then to have in-year cuts to funding notified post the setting of a budget. So, this is about a fair playing field. Give us some warning about cuts or efficiencies, and we can make appropriate plans. But when we're caring for some of the most vulnerable children you'll find anywhere in the country, against the backdrop of a global refugee crisis, to then take £4 million out of that funding in year at the exact moment the Prime Minister, which is why I've written to him and other ministers on this and been on the media about it, to take £4 million from this council's funding that's looking after those most vulnerable children in year after, in good faith, we set a budget, is, as far as I can see, unprecedented. It's unacceptable. It's outrageous. And at a time when the Prime Minister is being photographed in Syria saying that he wants the UK to play its part in a humane and humanitarian response to this crisis, then it's particularly unacceptable. I made it very clear, and many people in Croydon made it very clear to me, they would want Croydon to more than play our part in a humane response across councils, and London councils across Purley have made that clear, that local government would very much step up to the challenge of supporting those families. But I think there's been a breach of trust and a lack of faith in terms of the £4 million cut we've seen in year that is making that a slightly more difficult situation than it already need be. Before I bring others in, I just want to bring Alison in to take us through in a little bit more detail the very, very serious implications of the housing revenue account, which, for those who don't follow housing policy closely, is the money directly linked in a separate sort of a budget management system in terms of the income from tenants, council tenants in the borough, and how that sits in a separate budget to the other funding we've just been looking at. Alison.
Thank you, Leader. Simon touched on his presentation the changes to the housing revenue account and what that actually means for Croydon. This is a saving where the government have said there'd be a 1% reduction in social rents for 4 years in order to bring down the housing benefit bill. But it's very clear that where the most money on the housing benefit is actually paid to private landlords and not in the social housing sector. And what does this mean? Is Councillor Mead here this evening? No. Certainly Councillor Mead has played a part in setting the 30-year business plan for the HRA that we've got at the moment, and we've looked at our priorities under this. But it means that over the space of the next 4 years, we'll have £31 million less in order to deliver housing services, not only to our tenants, but to help with new housing to the borough. So we've been having to do a lot of hard work. We know that we need to keep to the decent home standard, but a lot of services will have to be reduced within that budget. And at the moment, there's no clear indication what will happen after 4 years. So that is going to have a huge effect on the services that we can actually offer to our tenants. That, taken with some of the other things like the benefits cap, like the introduction of stay to pay, will have an effect. And we've talked about other things, the tax credits going down. So it is a huge concern about how we're going to balance that for some of our residents.
Thank you very much, Alison. I'll take any comments or questions. I've seen Councillor Pollard.
Thank you, Leader. Let's start with where we want to support you on some of the things that you've been commenting on. The unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in particular, you said that it's an unprecedented change. Actually, it's not. We've had this various changes over the years to the funding levels that we were being offered on unaccompanied asylum-seeking children from governments of both persuasions. So it isn't entirely unprecedented, but every time it's been wrong, because it is absolutely not the right thing that Croydon taxpayers should be asked to pick up the bill for what is effectively a national service. I know all of our MPs have written to ministers on that, supporting the Council's position, and I'm sure the MPs of the other gateway authorities have been doing exactly the same, and I'm very happy to associate our side with that and to do anything that is helpful to put pressure on the Home Office and ministers to think carefully about this and to ensure that Croydon is dealt with fairly. So we entirely support you on that. I was interested in one of the things that Councillor Hall said about contract management, and he was very proud of the fact that Veolia's contract was going to be properly managed now. I'm just interested to know how he thinks he can square that with the total shambles that we've seen in the village system, which was introduced earlier this year and is still not working properly in a very significant chunk of the borough. So if that's managing contracts properly, God help us all. The final point I want to make is about recommendation 2 in this paper. That I find very, very worrying as a recommendation, because if you read it, what it essentially says is that a couple of members of the Cabinet, in consultation with a couple of officers of the Council, can decide absolutely anything they wish at all about any budget if they consider it to be in the Council or the administration's interest to do so. It's a very wide-ranging power of delegation that you are giving yourself there. And there are a number of recommendations contained within the paper where there is very little detail on how they will be implemented, green waste being one of them. There is no suggestion anywhere in this paper that actually we're going to get any more detail before the change, whatever the change is going to be, and what that change is completely mired in confusion, because it says one thing in this paper and Councillor Collins has said entirely a different thing to the Croydon Advertiser. So we need to be absolutely confident that if this council is to have any credibility left whatsoever on its openness and transparency agenda, that a number of these fundamental changes to services that are disposed of in 4 or 5 sentences in this paper will actually be subject to a proper process of democratic scrutiny, that they will come back to Cabinet in a format that enables them to be taken to scrutiny if that's the appropriate route. We don't want to see you taking a lot of decisions behind closed doors and telling us about it months afterwards, as you've done on a number of occasions through the summer, most recently with the European Investment Bank loan on the schools. We don't object to that at all, but we do object to finding out about it through the Croydon Advertiser rather than through the proper processes of this council.
Thank you. Can I start by very much welcoming what you say, Tim, in terms of the asylum seeker, because it is by far and away the most powerful and immediate issue facing both us and I think the rest of the local government. So your support and recognition of the seriousness of that issue is most welcome, and we will proceed and continue to proceed on that basis, because I think that gives us the best opportunity in terms of discussions with government. Just in terms, I won't go through everything, but in terms of a couple of the points, the key one you're raising there, of course we do need, as we've seen, whether it's positive news about European funding or negative news around other funding streams from government, we do need the ability to act quickly. But clearly any decisions taken by Cabinet colleagues or myself would be key decisions and would be treated appropriately. I would also be very keen indeed that everything in terms of budget decisions would, you know, at the beginning of a process, or as near the beginning as possible, be looked at very publicly by scrutiny, but that's in the hands of the scrutiny chair and the agenda there, because I think that does benefit. And I would remind people that we are here still actually only in September, many months ahead of the budget process in terms of openness and transparency. We're bringing these papers and these challenges here far earlier than I think you would have seen in some previous council cycles. In fact, I think Councillor Simon Hall has already been with Richard to scrutiny in terms of, you know, where we are with the budget. So we are, as much as possible, you know, very much putting both the bits of good news we have, but at the moment the overwhelmingly difficult financial challenges that are being presented out there in terms of the public domain and those discussions. So I've now seen Jason and then Councillor Phil Thomas.
Thank you, Leader. It's my understanding that the departmental variances that are included in this report don't contain any effects from the changes in unaccompanied asylum-seeking children's funding that has been discussed from central government, nor does it have any effect from the HRA changes. It's incredibly important when you are facing the kind of financial challenges that this council is, that departments hit their budgets. This council clearly has a department that is getting nowhere near its budgets in terms of its finances within the People Department, and is currently showing £11.5 million in terms of variance to that budget. The only significant benefits in terms of countering that seem to come from slippage in the capital programme and the fact that interest isn't being paid on capital expenditure that we thought would have happened, which in itself is not really a response to departmental overspend. So the question really is, when is Councillor Woodley going to get control of this department's finances?
Well, I think we'll take that as a comment at this stage, but you know, I do remind you. Well, I'll bring councillor colleagues in at the moment, but I'm very keen, cabinet colleagues in, but I'm very keen to take some questions in the interest of open and transparency from members of the opposition as well. But in terms of control of finances, I would remind the council as well that under your previous administration, borrowing went from a shade under 200 million to well over 700 million pounds. So we will not take lectures in terms of control of finances from an administration that was flung out of office by the people of Croydon with the Councillor Fisher's self-confessed £100 million black hole. Is Mike with us tonight? No. Phil.
Thank you, Tony. One thing I will say, Tony, is I do agree with you tonight on what you said about we are facing some tough challenges. But I do need to remind you that Ed Balls, before the election, told us that a Labour government wouldn't give any extra money to local government. So, you know, let's knock that old herring on the head, that there would be plenty of money if we had had a Labour government. He quite clearly stated that. Okay? Let me take you now, Leader, to page 23, paragraph 4.5, on the Green Garden waste collection. And, as I said, we know that the Council has to make a lot of savings. But what we also know is that this Council makes choices on what they need to cut. Nobody is forcing them to cut the Green Garden waste collection. There are other choices available to them if they want to take up those choices. What we do know is a frontline service. It's good for the environment. It's good for the council taxpayer because it saves us money on landfill costs. And it's also very, very popular with our residents. They really like this service. Now, perhaps Councillor Collins can answer a couple of questions for us tonight. Perhaps he can tell us, is there going to be a consultation on the cutting of this Green Garden waste, and then for the minority of people to be able to take it up as a paid service? Is there going to be a consultation? They talk about consultation all the time. 20 miles per hour zones, consultation. Is there going to be one on this? What happens, Councillor Collins, if 18,000 people don't take up the option of wanting a paid service? And are you going to expect those people to pay up front? Also, as well, when are you going to ask the people of Croydon whether they're going to sign up for this? When is the letter going out, and what is the cost of that? When you looked at the option of cutting the Green Garden waste collection, what other options did you kick into touch? You chose to cut the Green Garden waste collection. What other options didn't you take up? Also in the paper as well, you said there was going to be an increase in fly tipping. Can you tell us how much you're expecting fly tipping to go up? We're already the 7th worst council in the country on last year's performance. Does Councillor Collins want us to be the number 1? If residents don't want the Green Garden waste collection, all right, where are you going to expect them to take the Green Garden waste? If they can't take it to a recycling centre, what are you expecting them to do with it? So if they can't take it down to the recycling centre, they don't want to pay for it, where are you expecting that Green Garden waste to go? And finally, it's a fair question to ask, what's going to happen to it? Yeah. And also as well, Councillor Collins, if people can't afford the £60, like old age pensioners, what allowances are you going to make for those sort of people who can't afford it? Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Phil. Councillor Collins, I think, is very, very keen indeed to come back in some considerable detail with a number of the questions you've raised there. So I will try and balance who we're bringing in, who we're not bringing in. So I'll bring Councillor Louisa Woodley in to respond to that query at the moment. I'll bring Councillor Hall in at the end, and I've seen Margaret and Maria and Vidi, so I'll bring you in, but let's hear from Councillor Louisa Woodley first.
Thank you, Leader. I'm sure that councillors are aware that historically there's always been pressures in adult social care. And as Richard pointed out at the start of the presentation, over the past, if you look at budget of the past 3 years at this stage of reporting, there's always been projections of overspend. However, we have had a double whammy, as Councillor Hall has explained. We are underfunded as regards the funding we're receiving per head, and at the same time, we've had a 12% growth in people aged 65 and over, and of course, certain strategies that we have been putting in place haven't yet borne fruit, haven't yet actually delivered the savings that we would have thought would come through. So coupled with 12% increase and huge growth in this area, not just that, but people living longer and people presenting with more complex cases at the same time as we've had no recognition of the levels of deprivation and the more complex population that we have. Those are the reasons for that projection. However, in the meantime, we've had changes in the department. We've had a fresh pair of eyes looking at how we correctly predict the sort of numbers that we have coming through and the things that we are putting in place to ensure that we take our fair share of the sort of, for example, people who are put into social care from having been in hospital. We are moving towards joined up care, but in the meantime, we have to ensure that health the CCG takes its full share of the provision of that sort of service, and we don't take the brunt of the growth. We've got a prediction of 4 million just in growth demand, so we have put in place certain forms of governance, and we are having conversations to ensure that that growth and that demand is equally shared.
Thank you, Louisa, for a very full response indeed. If I could bring Councillor Margaret Mead in.
Thank you, Leader. Can I say, first of all, I'm very disappointed under Table 2 and the adult care placements that the individual figures for those three were not given, because to have over £6.5 million variance is very significant. It would have been very helpful if the individual figures could have been given. Going back to what Councillor Woodley has just said, the pressures on the budget were always known, and that was why, when the budget was set for 2014-15, the predictions were well known, and that's why the budget was set then. So it isn't just a sudden increase. They were well known at that time, and that's why the budget was there. And I have to say that since May 14, the reviews or whatever you have not captured these increases, and the overspends have increased significantly. And I know that from the outturn figures that have been presented for the cases. So my question is, could Councillor Woodley please tell me the percentage of agency workers that are working, especially in the adult social care department, please?
On that issue, Louisa, do you want to respond now? Then I'll move on to other items.
I don't have the percentages.
Well, I'm really surprised, Leader, because this is obviously a significant overspend, and I'm very surprised that the Cabinet member is not aware of the percentage and is not taking action to see what measures can be put in place, as we put in place, to encourage more agency staff perhaps to become permanent staff or increase the permanent staff. I'm very disappointed that figure is not available tonight.
Could I remind Councillor Mead that it was when we were the administration that we actually introduced a social worker academy, so to speak, and actually put in place systems to bring through people working in that area, and it was an initiative that was not fully followed up, and we do have in place, we do have the figures as regards the number of agency staff who are working as social workers. And I'm sure Councillor Mead is a bit disingenuous, because I'm sure that Councillor Mead is fully aware of the situation across London as regards the provision and availability of social workers. So we are doing everything possible to ensure that we reduce the level of agency staff and that we make sure that we aren't just, in some cases, outsourcing and not really looking after and caring for the most vulnerable in our society, but we are providing adequate forms of care. And as I referred to at the beginning of the evening, there were figures given that showed that historically, people have not set budgets that have actually taken into account growth, and we have been picking up and looking at those budgets and improving those budgets and actually dealing with the unprecedented growth coupled with the, in real terms, cuts that we've had from central government as regards the numbers that we've had to deal with.
Leader, I'm sorry. The award system brought under us was taking place under our administration, and we were encouraging more people to work as permanent staff, not agency staff. So Councillor Woodley is misinformed on that point, as on other points as well, because the figures and the predictions were there when we set those budgets, and to say that they have changed or they had changed since then was not the case. We were well aware, and we looked at all the pansy and the poppy information that was available to the department to make those decisions. So that is not correct to say that, Councillor Woodley.
Okay, well, I hear could we... my microphone's on, Margaret, but I hear what you say, but I think we're going to have to agree on that one to disagree. Vidi.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I want to focus on paragraph 4.6, your new parking charging policy, and mainly questions directed to Councillor B. Now, once again, we've seen a really important policy being implemented here, a new stealth tax being clobbered on the people of Croydon, and yet there is so little detail in this paper on what exactly is going to happen. So firstly, can the Cabinet member tell me what is the total parking income the Council gets now annually? And I'm not talking about income from fines, I'm talking about income from parking. What is the total income you get currently? My understanding is that this new policy is going to raise about £1 million a year, because you've said here that you've already accounted for a level of income has been included in this. So £1 million a year extra revenue for the Council, that is a significant increase in your parking revenue take. So how much is our parking charges actually going to go up by? I know you're doing this review and rationalization and all that, but surely if you've put a figure there, you know exactly how much you're going to increase parking charges by. So why don't you be open and transparent with the people of Croydon and tell them now how much their parking charges are going to go up by? Or are they going to get up on the 1st of January and find that they're suddenly clobbered with this huge increases in parking charges? The other question really is around the half-hour free parking which we introduced in our district centres. Can the Cabinet member guarantee that that half-hour free parking is going to continue in our district centres? And also, you made a manifesto promise that you were going to increase free parking to 1 hour in the borough. When are you going to implement that?
Thank you, Councillor Mohan. I think you'll find the Cabinet member is working very hard on many of those details, but I'll bring Councillor Cathy B in a minute. I'll just take Maria to finish off in terms of questions.
Thank you, Leader. Could I look at 3.74? It's about something that Councillor Simon Hall did mention about not providing school places for young people going forward. And could I have a ruling from the Borough Solicitor on that, whether this abdication of responsibility...
I do need to interrupt with the Chair. I don't think Councillor Hall said anything about not providing school places.
Can I just read this? Our policy, well, going forward, the Council only provide further school places where those are funded by central government is being considered as a continuation of the current policy is unaffordable. Can I just have a ruling then from the Borough Solicitor whether this abdication of responsibility and as a statutory responsibility is legal, please?
So I'll bring the Borough Solicitor in at the moment, in a moment on that, and I'll come to, if that's the end of that, Cathy first on parking.
Thank you, Leader. Firstly, the total income is £4.5 million. In terms of the individual increases for particular charges, because we've got such a huge range of charges, you can't say the different increase in particular areas, because in one place, particularly in the districts, they are so varied that in one place it might be, it'll just be a larger increase in one place than another, so it's going to depend on where people park. We're also going to be doing half-hour slots so that there'll be more flexibility so that people can, instead of having, if you think you're going to stay for more than 1 hour, you don't have to pay for 2 hours, you can pay for 1.5. So we're increasing some things like that. So we'll get the detail out as soon as we can. We've still got a little bit more of the modelling to do. Obviously, with the huge range of charges that we inherited, I have to say I was in awe when I read the first parking management charge of just how many pages of different regimes of parking charges. It went on forever and ever and ever. And this is actually a result of that we wanted to simplify it and ensure that we had consistency across the districts and not sort of really bizarre changes for really no apparent reason. So also parking charges haven't gone up for 6 years, and when I looked in one of the parking management reports in 2008-2009, I think there was a surplus of about 5 million or so in terms of parking income, and that surplus is now I think it's about 2.6 million in 2013-14. So clearly, you know, in 2008-2009, you were making a much, much greater surplus in terms of parking charges out of Croydon residents, and that's reflected in the fact that charges haven't gone up. So, you know, it still costs money to enforce. We have to have an enforce. There's no point in having paid for parking and parking restrictions unless you enforce it. It doesn't work. Many of our areas where we have that parking zones, it's because the residents are asking for it because there is contested parking, and we need to be able to afford to manage it properly. So that's why we're having to look at the parking charges. We'll get the information out as soon as we can, and free parking will continue in district centres.
Thank you very much indeed. So we'll return to that in due course, but within weeks, I promise you. Councillor Godfrey. No, I'm bringing in others now because others haven't had a chance to come in yet.
Thank you very much, Leader. I'd just like to say what excellent work the finance team have done on a very difficult budget as we do go forward. I'd also like to just highlight the fact that the issue of refugees and how welcome they are in this town, because I think it's very important that we as a town make that stand. We've always been very welcoming to refugees. The history of this town is one that 1,000 years ago, when we really were a saffron valley, it was a few hundred people, and it's always grown and it's always changed as a town, both from immigration from within these islands and from around the world. So I think it's very important that we continue to be a welcoming place for people. But that does mean that we are at the forefront of this direct government attack on Croydon, where the Tory government are putting a £9 million tax on the people of Croydon, and that really impacts all of our public services in this town, and actually that is something which we cannot bear any longer. So we do need the MPs in this town from both parties to deliver with this government, and particularly those that serve within the government, that actually they are responsible for £9 million and probably rising, because as Syria unwinds, actually we will need to be taking our responsibilities for that as well. So this is a really serious budget implication for this town, and it's vital that we have the support of everybody, and actually, you know, that these difficult issues that we're discussing tonight are actually insignificant in comparison to the bigger picture, and so thank you to everybody who's working hard on that from across the council.
Thank you, Timothy, and I think that is, you know, when we look, I'm not saying, you know, how we dispose of grass cuttings isn't important, but we are looking at some very serious issues indeed here. Can I bring the Borough Solicitor in, please, on the question that was raised earlier?
Thank you, Leader. I would like to reassure members of the Cabinet and members of the Council that the policy that is being referred to in this debate, mentioned at para 3.7.4 of the report, states, and I quote, is being considered. There is no policy as such, and obviously part of the considerations will be how far this Council can go, particularly in dialogue with the Government, in respect of the unprecedented demands on this authority caused by numerous events, many of which have been mentioned this evening. But may I reassure you, as your Borough Solicitor, this Council will not and has no intention of implementing any policy which could be held illegal in the courts.
I think that was a crystal clear response indeed. Can I bring Councillor Stuart Collins in?
Thank you, Chair. This will take a little time because there's been a number of inaccuracies mentioned tonight. And firstly, Councillor Thomas is in no position to be taken seriously on any issue connected with budgets. These savings are his Conservative government's fault. He's the architect of a change of attitude in a minority of residents, because he is the guy that cut the weekly landfill collection. And did he do any single piece of consultation with any of the residents in this borough when he cut that weekly landfill collection? And Councillor Thomas, when you make a cut, there is never any excuse for fly tipping, and it's a pity that you didn't put that message across when you actually cut the weekly landfill collection. The weekly landfill collection's too weekly. If you had had the right attitude in the first place, you wouldn't see the mess that we're in now. He's also the man that cut 1.6 million out of the Veolia budget, which meant that there were less crews, less people working on the contract. And some very interesting statistics here. Before he made that cut of £1.6 million. There was 260 missed collections by Veolia on average per week. That then went up under his stewardship to 530 missed collections a week under Veolia. And obviously, when we were introducing a new system with Veolia, one that they've introduced in Bromley, and there wasn't any fuss there, although there was a lot of missed collections there, but the opposition were a little bit more responsible there. The new system came in. Obviously, there was teething problems. But I'm pleased to actually say to you that right now, at this particular moment, as of last week, we're down to 394 missed collections. So that is considerably better than Veolia were performing under your contract. And you wouldn't know those sort of statistics, Councillor Thomas, because in 6 years you only met with Veolia on one occasion. Myself and my colleague have met with Veolia on numerous occasions. Our officers have also met regularly with them. Well, I'm only going on what Veolia have told us. So anyway, but the difference is, and when we go to the green waste system, it was actually Councillor Thomas that actually cut the supply of the green waste garden bags. So, we do find out that he does make cuts on this issue. But the difference between us and the Conservatives is we don't make promises in manifestos that are broken. Councillor Thomas in 2010 told the public of this town that there would be no cut in the weekly bin collection. It would remain at weekly and it wouldn't go to 2 weekly. And then promptly gets in and actually changes it, and as I stated, with absolutely no consultation at all. But Labour told the truth. We said we wouldn't cut the green waste service. We considered charging because of government cuts. And that is on record at scrutiny, and it's on record at the last full council meeting when I answered a public question. However, the rest of you are just as bad. You all put on the blue rosette in the lead up to a general election, but the minute you win, you divorce yourself from David Cameron and George Osborne's policies of austerity. And austerity max is the Conservative Party's baby. And why don't you actually get some courage and actually stand up for the things you actually believe in? And you believe in cutting local government funding, you always have done. Our current leader, because you want to talk about where the situation now is, our current leader, Jeremy Corbyn, actually says that he is anti-austerity. And I noticed that perhaps there's a couple of you tonight rather childishly wearing his badge. I think it's Councillor Thomas and Councillor Cummins. I think you've got Jeremy Corbyn badges on. So am I to think that you are now with us against some of the austerity cuts? But the irony is we're not actually cutting the service. Yet they're up in charge, they're up in arms about what will work out to be a £1.10 charge at maximum to the residents of this town. And what is that in real terms? Let's understand what £1.10 a week is, right? It's less than half a pint of beer, it's less than a box of 6 jam tarts, and it's the same as a large loaf of bread. But they choose as their responsibility to make this the big issue tonight and to make this their main leader of opposition. Irresponsible opposition and opportunistic opportunity. And what are they angry about? They're not angry about the 20% cuts in the police force that are actually going to happen because of your government. You're not even angry about the fact your government at the next budget are going to cut free meals to school children. And you're not even really angry about the fact that we won't cut services to those vulnerable children. You should be supporting us on that. And why is this opposition irresponsible? Because 7 out of 11 Conservative boroughs now charge for garden waste. Because the Tory opposition in Sutton and Lambeth didn't even run a campaign against these charges. And what about your mates in Bromley? There's no noise from the Tory boys over there about charging for garden waste collections. And worst of all, you want to divorce, but you're Tories, you're Conservatives. But what's worst of all, and this is Croydon, this is your leaflet where you've already prejudged the issue, so don't talk about us telling you this, you've already prejudged it, you know full well that we're going to charge. But what you say in your silly leaflet, which is totally irresponsible, is firstly you deliberately mislead residents, and I'll quote this, by saying that if Labour didn't run the so-called Ambition Festival this summer or its Fairness Commission, they could find the money to pay for the garden waste service. What an absolute load of nonsense, and you full well know it, Because those two combined services cost... Look, you've had your chance. Will you just listen? Right. When you've... Right. In your leaflet, these are your words, there's your leaflet.
Please?
There's Councillor Steve O'Connell on the front, so it's yours, Croydon Tories. You've said that would pay for the Green Waste Service. Well, the Green Waste Service cost £1.6 million. The Fairness Commission and the Ambition Festival were a one-off cost that cost £400,000. So you know that. You are deliberately misleading the residents of this town. And if you really valued the service, you would not be going out with a silly leaflet like this, running a campaign to telling all the residents in the town to sign a petition against the charges and not to have any part of it. If you really believed in it, you'd be telling them, with us, as many people as possible sign up to it, because it will be a great value service. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the service in the end. But you are completely irresponsible. Now... But the public aren't daft. I mean, I've already been to a meeting. I've been to a meeting at Norbury Residents Association this weekend, and actually explained to them what we were going to do with green waste. And every single one of those people said, "Well, we fully understand that collecting grass cuttings is not a serious issue when you talk about cutting services to vulnerable people." And for those residents listening, I will now tell you what this service is going to entail. It will be an improved garden waste service that you can choose what size wheelie bin you want. It can be 140 litres, it can be 240 litres. There will be no more purchasing black plastic bags or seeing them fly down the street. You'll get a £10 discount if you sign up early. It will be £55 for a 140 litre bin, and it will be £60 for a 240 litre bin, with a far greater capacity to actually get rid of your garden waste than the green bags would have actually ever offered. And for those people that don't sign up or can't afford it, there will be a £15 for 15 bags ad hoc charge that you can actually get. Like, it will be a green waste bulky collection, so you will be able to deal with it. This borough's got three centres that you can take garden waste to, which is more than many other boroughs have got. Now, we need 18,000 people to sign up to make this service work. So what I'd say to the public is, so please, if unlike the Conservatives you genuinely value this service, please sign up. It's only £1.10 a week. It stops cuts to vital services that people's lives depend on. And not one person can seriously argue that collecting grass cuttings is more important than services that save lives. So come on, Croydon, everybody, let's do the right thing. And you do the right thing overnight, right? Drop these silly leaflets you're putting out. Join us in getting people to sign up and actually have some mature politics in this town. Thank you, Chair.
Compelling argument, and only Councillor Pollard. I know many in his own group wonder why Councillor Thomas is still left as the spokesperson for the environment policy, having driven all those dreadful decisions that Councillor Collins referred to. Of course, Councillor Cummins tried to join the Labour Party back in the summer, but even at a time of change, the Labour Party took.
I'm still a member. You still send me all the communications.
My understanding is that they've got your number in every sense of the word, Councillor Cummins. But you would be very welcome if you wanted to cross the floor this evening and formalise the arrangement, because we are very much a broad church in the Labour Party. If I could now just briefly invite Councillor Hall to wind up the debate, and then we can move on.
Thank you, Leader. I think one of the things that's been incredible for me is when we're accused of not being transparent enough, not giving enough detail, when we've made clear that key decisions will go through the appropriate process, and when, after all, the change from weekly to fortnightly collection was done by reorganisation of the rounds or something similar in the budget papers, so no transparency. So I don't think we've got any lessons to take from the opposition on transparency. The fact is that in terms of the People Department, there have been year-on-year overspends since 2012, and what we are seeing now is that the overall spend is not rising despite an increase in the level of demand, but more work absolutely has to go on to bring the cost under control, to more accurately forecast, and I'm delighted that we've got people like the recently appointed director of adult social care who will be able to bring fresh eyes to these areas. In terms of social worker, everyone knows that there is a massive shortage in the country and in particular in London. That's why at the moment 40% of our agency spend is on social workers. This is the reality that all London boroughs face, and we've been involved in a pan-London approach in terms of rates to bring the cost of that sort of agency social workers down. In terms of school places, you know as well as I do that there are other ways in terms of, for example, free school to free school providers who share our ethos, which can be done rather than, if I look at the last few years and prospectively the next couple of years, £140 million of borrowings for the inadequate funding of school places. So, overall, what we're doing here and what we've seen tonight is a set of responsible, thought-out, transparent proposals and actions of an administration that is determined to remain, as it has been so far, in control of its destiny. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Indeed, if we can move on to the next agenda item, which is... can we agree the recommendations of the Cabinet report? Cabinet, thank you. Agreed, thank you very much. If we can move on to the next agenda item, we need to crack through the agenda now, but this is a very important issue. This is the planning framework that will help shape the borough for the next 20 years, Croydon's local plan and strategic policies, and we're going to have a short presentation with Councillor Alison Butler, and then Alison and Joe and others will comment and we'll take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. As Tony has just said, this is an incredibly important document in which an incredible amount of work has actually gone into it. So it is, in fact, about shaping our borough over the next 20 years and making Croydon a better place to live. When we looked at the local plan, what we looked at was many of those commitments we did have in our manifesto, Ambitious for Croydon. And so it is about increasing housing supply, and I'm sure everybody in this chamber is in agreement that that's something that this council, as other local authorities, has a desperate need to do. But it's also incredibly important in these times to increase affordable housing when more and more people are being forced out of housing in the borough. We said when we stood for election that we would have a very strong focus on district centres, and this introduces both district centres that were in the plan, but also new neighbourhood centres. We're looking at the Croydon Opportunity Area, Central Croydon, and what's equally important is the employment opportunities and economic growth for our town. There's an increased emphasis on culture, ensuring that our cultural quarter can get delivered, but also that culture is part of our offer in the districts as well. And all this brings together the Croydon Promise, the Growth Zone and the Place Plans. If we look at CLP1, why is it needed? Well, one of the things is the adoption of the further alterations of the London plan, where the Mayor of London has said that we need a minimum housing target of 1,435 per year, but has also made it very clear that boroughs will be expected to do more than that. We'll need to increase that to answer the need. So some of the things that we've looked at is increased densities, particularly in our urban centres, but also sustainable growth of the suburbs. We've identified neighbourhood centres because that's important, that's where people live, and again touching on the employment, which is so important for our town, because it's not only about homes for people to live in, we must ensure that they have jobs as well. We've looked at the introduction of the East Croydon office retention area and also about protecting and enhancing our history. So ambitious for Croydon within the local plan. is looking at homes for Croydon residents, not only to meet the needs of a growing population, but more and more we know that families in the borough are worried about where their children are going to live, how they're going to afford it, and where they're going to live in Croydon. So we do need that greater supply of affordable housing. Our neighbourhood centres are about enabling existing and growing communities to flourish. So where we've seen shops shut down and other essential community facilities lost, we've got a concentration on ensuring they're protected, revitalising the district centres. And of course you need infrastructure planning to ensure that growth is appropriately accommodated, to ensure there is the infrastructure to make all of this stand up. If we look at one of the things that we've been working on, it's around district centre designations, but also local centres. And that's what people have told us, that in their local area, they do value the small parade of shops. They value the churches, the pubs, the community clubs, the other facilities which are so important. So the plans had a particular look at those. And I don't expect you all to read this, but looking at the Croydon opportunity area, there's such a range of things that the plan will cover. So it's around green space, it's around conservation areas, protecting our transport, so the railways, the trams, the buses, looking at the schools that are needed, the industrial areas that are needed, looking at neighbourhood centres, even district energy sources. So the plan goes across all of those things that are vital to creating Croydon in the future. As I touched on in the beginning, the local plan will deliver at least 1,435 dwellings per annum, but we do know there's a need to do more than that. So there'll be development within the urban area only to accord with national planning policy and ensuring conformity with the London plan policy. And so the housing over these next 20 years will be in the Croydon opportunity area, in urban sites, windfall sites, and there's also sites which are already under construction. And if we look at this, this kind of shows the division of that housing supply. 9,500 in the opportunity area, the town centre. The windfall and the sustainable growth of the suburbs will be another 10,500. And again, urban sites beyond central Croydon. If we look changes to CLP2, why are they needed? And that's to provide an updated development management planning policies to keep up with what's happening in Croydon and the changes. And this part of the plan includes site proposals, land use to meet those allocations for homes, and to meet growth across the borough. And that's both for homes, schools and health facilities. Some of the things we've looked at in the local plan part 2 is the identification of opportunity areas where you can have high quality homes along with amenity space. Also new tech, cultural and creative enterprise centres to make sure that Croydon does truly sign up to that tech city label. Greater protection for the borough's most important local green spaces, and stronger policies to reduce flooding, which I know is a concern, particularly in parts of south of the borough. But also the social changes, restriction on hot food and takeaway units, a pub protection policy, and restrictive care home policy to align with the need that's actually within the borough. Briefly, just going on to, that's the part of the timetable, but the most important part is the part going out to consultation, which will be within November and December of this year, where everybody will have the opportunity to comment on that, and there'll be a number of road shows and initial ways you can actually get involved in that. And then it's hoping that we would have the publication of proposed submission versions by spring, summer of next year. As I've said, this has been an incredibly detailed bit of work, so I just wanted to thank some of the many officers that have been involved, and if I do miss anybody out, I do apologise. But I'd like to give special thanks to Steve Dennington, Dominic Menny, Tim Naylor, Lee Longhurst, Therese Finn, Dominique Barnett, Kieran Gilmore, Kim Louis, Agnieszka Zewamiskal, Joe Negrini and Pete Smith, of course, and an extra thanks to Councillor Paul Scott, who's led on our side on this project right the way through, and also to Councillor Jason Perry, who did a lot of the initial work under his administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, and thanks, I know, to all those officers, because this is phenomenally detailed work that will help influence and shape the borough, as we all want to make sure that the changes, the rapid changes we see in some areas, protect all that's good about Croydon, but make us fit for the future and support our communities across the borough and our very vibrant, strong district centres, as well as the work that's happening across the metropolitan centre. Any questions or comments? Councillor Jason Perry.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for the presentation, Councillor Butler. I note the report, and indeed I do recognise much of the report that's before us tonight. As Councillor Butler says, it did start life under the previous Conservative administration. And I'd also join with Councillor Butler in thanking the very excellent officers that we do have within the planning department that I know work tirelessly to find the evidence and produce these documents, and they're fairly weighty documents, as we all know. I think there's much to be welcomed within the documents that have come forward. Many of those you've mentioned tonight: protection of pubs, controls on residential care homes, restaurant quarter designations, policies to prevent empty retail shells being left in new developments, the rationalisation of district centres and the creation of new neighbourhood centres, and there are many other very positive moves within the documents. However, we do have some areas of concern. The attack on the Greenbelt with the proposals for 3 gypsy and traveller sites within the Greenbelt, despite the fact that government only last month made it quite clear that this was inappropriate development within the Greenbelt. The return to garden grabbing that was so prevalent when you were last in office, and this will see gardens under threat right across the borough from Norbury right through to Coulsdon. And the downgrading of a number of local areas of special character across the borough. I know we have the new local heritage areas, but a number of the existing LASCs have dropped by the wayside, and I think that leaves us with further threats in those areas. And I think those 3 areas pose a real threat to our green belt, our green spaces, and the character of our borough when we go forward. What I find slightly alarming is that some of those policies, the return to garden grabbing and the de-designation of the LAS, do not even appear in the reports that are before us tonight, and they're actually buried in the e-copy attachments. And I just wonder how many members are actually aware of some of these changes. You know, do the members for Upper Norwood know that Preston Road will no longer be a LASC if this policy actually goes through? And I think it's very important that all members make sure they read these documents, as there is a lot of very detailed information. Councillor Butler mentions that I began the process, and one of the very important things I felt when I was Cabinet Member was the cross-party member liaison group that we held to discuss emerging policy. We've had a couple of those meetings under the current administration, but unfortunately they seem to have fallen by the wayside, and a number of the proposed policy areas that have been coming forward within the documents have not been discussed or seen on a cross-party basis before their publication. And I think that lack of engagement makes for a poorer document. I think previously, when we had cross-party working groups, people were able to air their views and discuss issues. And I think the fact that you're losing input from across the members of this council, backbenchers and cabinet members, I think is a shame. And I don't think it's really the action of an open and transparent council, which I'm sure you aspire to be. So there's much good things coming through, but I think there's some real areas of concern, and I hope that all members are looking at the detailed policies that sit behind.
Thank you, Jason, for those comments. And just to assure you that there will be, during this consultation period, I understand a series of those cross-party members groups going. But I think we should, make it very clear that this is a document out to consultation. That is the process, and it's very much inviting, whether it's local politicians or residents' associations or whoever, to feed into the process. Shall I take a couple more contributions and then get some responses to the questions? I saw Margaret and Tim. Did I see anyone? And then Margaret, Tim, Jason, and then I'll get some responses, and then we'll see if there's any other comments.
Thank you, Leader. Can I say that under policy DM6, which relating to takeaways, I'm disappointed because I think it could be stronger. The policy says that it's acceptable as long as it does not result in more than 50% of ground floor units and does not result in 2 or more adjoining A5 units. I mean, if we're serious with the Hearttown brand and also encouraging healthy eating, and also as the borough is a food flagship borough, I do feel that, and also bearing in mind some members may remember Councillor Avis strongly representing the fact that I, was not taking this issue seriously enough and saying, what are we doing? I mean, we have an opportunity here to, support our healthy plans that we have in place by taking this a bit further, and definitely we should not be encouraging new units to be set up near schools. It's not, it goes against a lot of all of our other policies. On a separate issue to deal with the green belt, I do want to record that obviously 2 of the traveller sites are in Heathfield and 1 of them is very near close by. And I take you back to the debate which was in Council last year, I think it was, and that was to do with an assurance that you weren't going to be building on playing fields. And I remember asking Councillor Louisa Woodley if she could give an assurance about green belts. And she said that there are no plans to build on Greenbelt. Clearly, this paper goes against that. So, it's a little bit very disappointing, and I'm finding it very difficult to believe what one person says at one time and then comes along, and now we have a paper which goes against all those things. So, and that was only last year.
Margaret, Tim.
If I can just refer you to page 93, the regeneration of Purley district centre. I note that what's in the paper here talks about leisure facilities, but it doesn't specifically mention a pool. I did also note that in the Croydon Advertiser, I think it was last week, there was talk about that being the objective. So I just appreciate some clarity on that. Is the policy to put a pool there, or is the policy not to put a pool there?
Thank you very much. In terms of the policy in specific areas, we'll be coming back to that, but I think you've seen the commitment we've got in terms of Purley. But if just on Purley, let's be very clear that we want to have a consultation with the people of Purley about what the people of Purley want to see in their district centre. I don't think it's for this council to be bringing top-down proposals forward. I very much want to see a bottom-up conversation. Well, we're coming on to Purley in a minute on a very positive agenda, but just in terms of finishing the questions, Councillor Jason Cummins.
Thank you, Leader. On the 17th of September, if I could just go into a little bit more detail from something that Councillor Perry was referring to. A communication came out from the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government and the Minister for State, Housing and Planning. And it said that this was titled Greater Protection for the Green Belt from Unauthorised Development. And it was referring to applications for new development on Green Belt should not be approved unless in very special circumstances, and that this remained true even where councils do not have an up-to-date supply of caravan sites, and was essentially saying that new traveller site developments should not be being built on the Green Belt. I then find on a Cabinet paper 4 days later that at Pear Tree Farm there is a suggestion for a traveller site in the Green Belt. They seem strangely at odds with each other, and I was wondering if you could say whether or not you're intending going directly against the government's instructions with regard to that use of land in the Green Belt.
Well, of course, we have government instructions in terms of providing sites for travellers, but I think you'll find the policy refers to the use of any existing buildings on greenbelt sites. That may sound like a nuance, but I think it's an important distinction. In terms of be it swimming pools anywhere in the borough or anything else, this consultation clearly keeps all options open. On some of the other more specific technical issues, Joe, do you wish to come back?
Thank you, Leader. Just to respond to points from Councillor Perry, firstly around the traveller sites and then subsequent questions. We do have a requirement from government to provide traveller sites in the borough, and we went through an exhaustive process. We started with 300 sites that we were looking at, and as members will probably know who are well versed on planning policy, we had to set a number of criteria that we need to measure those 300 sites against, which include land ownership, access, proximity to residential development is a really important one, both in terms of the nature of the gypsy traveller accommodation, but also in terms of the impact on local residential areas. We needed to look at issues of deprivation. We needed to make sure that we needed to keep within budget constraints in terms of being able to provide those sites. Members will also know that we are under incredible pressure in terms of the numbers of gypsies and travellers who want to locate in Croydon. We find in the work that we did on our assessment that we need to find an additional 39 pitches, and also for a stopping place for travellers as well. So from the 300 set against all of those criteria, that's how we came to the proposals at the moment for the 3 sites at Coombe Nursery Farm and Pear Tree Farm. In terms of the issues around back gardens, I'd like to draw members' attention to page 23 and 24. Currently, within the borough, 35% of the land mass, effectively, of the whole of the borough is back gardens. We, as Councillor Butler set out, we have, as from the London plan requirements, 1,435 homes per year to build. Our housing need figure, though, which is the other figure that Councillor Butler mentioned, is 2,162 homes per year we need to find in the borough, which means that we need to look to intensify. You'll see in the table that was put up as part of Councillor Butler's presentation that we're trying to find alternative places for that intensification. Obviously, the key one is the Opportunity Area Planning Framework area, where we've got capacity we assess in the region of 9,500 homes. We also, in terms of the district centres, as per London Plan guidance, looking at intensification in and around main transport hubs. Those are the most attractive places for people to locate when we're looking at increasing the supply. Those are the types of sites developers want to see. Under current government legislation, planning legislation, existing residents with large back gardens have a lot of extensive rights under permitted development to actually increase and intensify without actually coming through the planning system at all. If you look on page 23 in terms of backland and back garden development, we went through extensive assessment through the borough character appraisal and character topology, which is an appendix to this report. We've said within the development on garden lands that it needs, any type of development needs to complement the local character. That borough character appraisal goes into a lot of detail across the whole of the borough, what we're looking and what we're looking at and what we mean by that. And the other key thing is around biodiversity, to ensure that whether we have ecosystems and biodiversity issues, that those planning applications for people who want to look at back garden development would need to submit an ecology study or assessment. So there are some, caveats in terms of looking at development. But within the policies that we've got within these proposals, it's absolutely clear there's a key thing for us about ensuring that any development in any part of the borough complements local character.
Thank you very much, Joe. Councillor Phil Thomas.
Could you just clarify this Purley pool? Because I'm not sure what you said in your answer. Is there going to be a swimming pool there, yes or no?
We're not discussing Purley Pool this evening because that's part of the local plan. But I had a fantastic visit down to Purley Pool only a couple of weeks ago, and it was looking quite splendid, I might add. So Purley Pool's an issue for another day. But as we know, your administration failed to invest in it for 10 years, which is why we had to bring forward an emergency package last year to save it, because you had run it into the ground. So it's very much this Labour administration that has saved Purley Pool from the Tory neglect and your then Cabinet its plans to shut the place down. Quite disgraceful. Can we agree the recommendations, colleagues? Thank you very much, and look forward to those cross-party and working groups, and invite maximum contribution from the public on that. If we can now move on to the Purley bid, tremendously exciting potential for this, because the regeneration of our district centres, and Purley is one of the key ones, is absolutely fundamental to what we want to see across the borough. We have some very strong working relationships with business across the borough, so it gives me a great pleasure to introduce this item. Simon, are you going to lead off on this with some comments, or will I bring Councillor Letts in first? Councillor Letts, and then I think we'll invite Simon. And Simon, welcome, I should say.
Well, I think you've actually said more or less, Leader, what I was going to say. But having met with Simon and having walked round and talked to businesses and indeed local people, I think when this goes out to the vote, I think the voting starts on the 15th of October and it will finish on the 15th of November. And hopefully there is a yes vote, which will be announced on the 18th of November. I do want to congratulate, before we ask Simon, the Chair, to give his views, but I do want to congratulate the work that Simon and indeed his colleagues on the committee in getting thus this far. We are very supportive of what they're doing, and it's certainly, I think that the proposal document is attached, and it says, let's make Purley better for business, and that's exactly what this will do. So, with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Simon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time here. I'd just like to give a quick introduction to what a BID is, a Business Improvement District, if you're not familiar. There are defined areas where the businesses within that area will get to vote whether they would like to increase an investment equivalent to a percentage of their business rates within that area, which we will then look to control and spend on areas that we see fit. Why does Purley need a BID, a Business Improvement District? At the moment, there has been a loss of shops and businesses within the area, with empty units increasing, both in retail and commercial areas. The town has a little bit of a tired look to it. There's certainly parking issues within the town. Speaking to the retail units, this is one of the things we'd like to address with regards to making sure it is much more accessible for people to go through the town. And if you have a look at the town, it has a kind of a feel of a pass-through town, so nowhere to actually go and park. There are parking spaces there, we just need to make it much more accessible for people to come and invest and spend in the town. The work to date, we've put in a lot of work, as mentioned. We've gone through the businesses, had a very good response rate from the ones that we've met, about 95% in favour of this initiative. We've then gone and had a look at what the issues are by speaking to the businesses, which we've got around about 200 plus issues that has been raised, which we would look to address over the term. And we also have worked very closely with the council so far to date, with some really good engagement on building baseline agreements and seeing how we're going to deliver these improvements. As mentioned, we've got around about 200 that we've already identified. We've basically broken this down into 5 different areas. Parking and accessibility, as mentioned, predominantly on signage here, but getting people to be able to know how to use the town. Business engagement, making sure that we network with the businesses and look to see if we can make discounts on bulk purchasing. Cleaner and greener, making sure that the town is fresh and someplace where people would like to come along and spend some time and money. Marketing and image, improving the perception of the town and making sure that people are aware of what the town has got to deliver, as well as speaking with the owners of the closed retail units to bring in more investment and a wider diversity of businesses within the area to make it, again, a much more better place to stop and spend your money. And we're also looking at the Safer Streets campaign, something along the lines of the crime reduction partnership that's already in place with the Croydon bid. So that, in a nutshell, what we've got an offer for the Purley bid, and I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Simon. And I know as a council and cabinet, and I'm sure I speak for reasonably sure I speak for all members, that we very much strongly support the work that you and others are doing, and I pay tribute to that work in terms of the energy and the hard work I know goes into putting a bid together and hopefully through to a successful vote. And then I know myself and cabinet colleagues in the relevant areas look forward to conversations when hopefully you're formally in place and the bid is formally in place about those wider discussions around both some very practical issues around parking through to those bigger issues in terms of what I think everybody wants to see in terms of some investment and regeneration in that part of Croydon. So you're not here, this is not a select committee, you're not here to be questioned by me or anybody else on the council, but I very much welcome your contribution. Before I bring Councillor Letts back to finish, is there anyone else on this issue? No? Okay, so, sorry, I've seen Jason. Sorry, Jason.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Sorry. I know the traders have worked very hard on this. I know the local MP, Chris Philp, Steve O'Connell, Councillor Bruce sitting there as well. I know there's been real engagement with the locality. So it's coming to a head, and I wish everybody well in the vote in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Jason, for that. Tony, to conclude.
Well, I think this is going to be very exciting for Purley, and it will totally bring vibrancy and success to those businesses. There are a few, there are some empty spaces of offices and indeed business, but quite frankly, I'm sure when the yes vote comes and 165,000 is ploughed back into that business community, it can only go from strength to strength, and I wish it well.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Simon. And I think if you'll be very welcome, hopefully, to be back here with an update next year, very much with an up and running live bid, and we'll see how we're making progress then. So thank you very much indeed. Can we agree the paper, colleagues? Thank you. And you're very welcome. We don't always get applause from the public gallery, so look forward to work. Thank you for being here. Okay, if we can move on to the next paper, agenda item 9, invested in our district centres lit funding. Councillor Cathy B.
Thank you, Leader. This is a report that comes annually setting out how we're going to spend the money that we get from TfL for neighbourhoods and corridors. This is for the financial year 2016-2017. Lots of you have seen something like this before. It's the pot of money that's used to fund lots of the things that people bring to the traffic management committees, so things like pedestrian crossings and road markings for CPZs and double yellow lines, funds all of those things that residents want in order to improve the highways and make our roads safer. So I'll just leave it there since it's a regular report and take any questions.
Thank you, Cathy. Councillor Viddy Mohan.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, firstly, I wanted to thank you for your earlier reply. I never got to actually ask you a supplementary, but I just wanted to thank you for confirming a 25% increase in parking charges across Croydon. Anyway, coming to this paper, I just want to touch upon...
Mohan, you have a rather patchy record on stating the facts in public. I don't think Councillor B spoke about any specific charges. She actually spoke about a fairer parking policy for Croydon. So I'll take it that you can't quote things she never said, and we'll get back on this agenda item. Hopefully.
I think the maths is simple, but I'll explain it later. Anyway, 4 million, 1 million, 25%. Anyway, let's focus on this paper then, and I want to talk about your policies on quiet ways and where they fit into this, because obviously over the summer we had this rather unedifying spectacle of the cabinet member and councillors from her own party having this sort of war of words in the local press, which I don't think did Croydon any good. But my question really is that with all this additional funding which you are asking for TfL, are you going to then impose more quiet ways across the borough? Is that your plan? Could you please explain that? And secondly, I want to refer you to paragraph 3.11, where while we welcome you bidding for money to enhance the district centre in South Norwood, I remember our administration had looked at and had committed to a £1 million funding package for Norbury district centre, and I'm just wondering why this has disappeared.
Thank you very much. Because I would remind you on quiet ways and many other things, we are working very closely with TfL and the GLA, who's actually driving that policy. And of course, on the Pacific issue of some local quiet ways, we had a very, very good and very detailed scrutiny meeting. I don't know if you were able to attend that a couple of weeks ago in the chamber. Councillor B.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Mohan, for your questions. In terms of quiet ways, we are very committed to improving cycling facilities within Croydon. We think it's very important, not just for those people who want to cycle, but actually in terms of dealing with many of the issues of congestion. We've been talking a lot about growth. So, as you've heard us repeat many, many times, if we get the anticipated growth in Croydon, we will get more traffic on our roads. It's really important in terms of managing congestion that we encourage people to find other ways of getting around. Otherwise, we'll simply end up sat on roads breathing in fumes. So that's why we support quiet ways. We had bearing in mind the issues that arose over the Norbury Avenue Quiet Way, or the Norbury Avenue section of the Croydon to Waterloo Quiet Way, we held a scrutiny meeting to look at how we can learn lessons. We do think that we need to learn some lessons about how that was handled. However, not all quiet ways involve the degree of the significance of change that was indicated in Norbury Avenue. So there are much of the proposed routes for quiet ways, certainly that have been developed so far, involve sort of changes around junctions and things like that. Some of which are would be involved if the Waterloo to Croydon one goes ahead. So we are looking at, so it will not necessarily be hugely significant changes. Any further quiet ways will need to be planned and mapped, and we will look at how we can make those work. We did learn some very interesting points in terms of other places in terms of developing those strategies, in that some places really sort of did more in terms of modelling what would happen and looking at sort of further implications where you quieten one place and looking at how much further you need to move out in order to deliver sort of the quietness and to look at the sort of knock-on effects. So those are the sorts of things that we're trying to learn and think about, and we take it further. So still very much supporting a quiet ways, and we will be looking to see what we can do to improve a wide range of cycling facilities in Croydon. Just in terms of Norbury, when we took this paper last year, we already indicated that the significant spend for Norbury would need to be moved to the following financial year in order to actually deliver. So there's no change whatsoever here, because this is only looking at 16-17.
Thank you very much. And this is a paper on the LIP funding, but via the cycle quiet way route, because it was, of course, this administration. I don't think you really supported, did you, Councillor Mohan, the fantastic international cycle race we had here back in the summer. But that's where myself and Councillor B first had a very good discussion around cycling with Andrew Gilligan, the Mayor's cycling advisor, and he's very keen to work closely with this administration in terms of expanding cycling where we can in Croydon, and that's not something we saw, I think, from the previous administration. We inherited a cycling desert, I think it would be fair to say, and it's great to see so many cycle racks now around stations and other key points in the borough, and that's very much what we're working to. But in terms of the LIP funding paper, can we agree the paper, colleagues? Thank you very much indeed. And if we can move on to supporting flexible working in our borough, and Councillor Tony Letts.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I welcome this report and this proposal. with regards to flexible working, because it really does support particularly those who have childcare or dependent caring duties. But it also brings much, I think, to employers. And it was very interesting. If you look at page 6 of the report, there's the Croydon brokerage service. And we had a workshop on that with employers, the voluntary sector, and other people a couple of weeks ago. And I have to say, flexible working was one item that was warmly supported, and it realised it. I think there was a realisation too about one or two people who felt maybe it wouldn't work, that when it was explained exactly what it would do for businesses, it was very much welcomed. What I would like to say is that we are working with, again, if you go to page 15 under consultation, we are working with Timewise in order that we are accredited. And I understand we have now found the money, Chairman, and this is going to go ahead, and we shall seek accreditation by the end of this financial year. I have worked with this with my colleague, Councillor Alicia Fleming, and it's been one of the most positive pieces of work that we have done. So I urge people to support this proposal. Recommendation.
Thank you, Tony. Indeed, any questions or comments on this paper? Hopefully it's supported across the piece. Thank you very much. Can we agree the recommendation? Thank you. If we could move on to develop an integrated travel offer and services, Councillor Louisa Woodley. Councillor Elisa Fleming, I apologise.
Thank you. This is an ongoing key piece of work. I point you towards the recommendations, namely the developing of an integrated travel service that we hope will be implemented in the next year, 2016 to 2017. It looks at supporting our ambitious for Croydon manifesto pledges to make sure also that we see, remembering that the young person becomes the adult and that they are the same person. There are savings that can also be made from moving towards an integrated travel service, which will also free up an opportunity for the transport to be used both morning and afternoon and in between. I'll also point you to page 197, 3.4, 3.5, which establishes for you some of our key points moving forward for the all-age disability service and the caveats within that: developing integrated travel service, promoting and supporting independence and developing alternative travel options, bearing in mind that for our young people that are at the moment in school age and travelling on the school buses, we also want to continue to make sure that we're able to move them on so that when they become adults, they are able to travel independently. I think the paper speaks for itself. The officers have done a lot of work in relation to getting us to this section. I don't know if Councillor Woodley wants to add anything in relation to the adult side, but just to say a huge thank you to Paul and all the other officers that have been involved in this process thus far. It hasn't been easy, and there's been a lot of discussions, and moving forward I'm sure there'll be more, but I welcome it, and I ask that everybody will support the recommendations.
Thank you, Elisa. Some truly innovative work going on here. Louisa, anything to add?
Just to say that the paper does set out in detail the sort of policy that we will be consulting. It is the direction of travel is to promote independence and ensure that people can travel safely.
Thank you, Louisa. Maria, then Margaret.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, this is clearly and always has been a very difficult area with quite severe pressures. I mean, overall, it's probably a good idea to bring it together for where savings is concerned, but I do see that the various thresholds are being raised. So could I just have some reassurance from the Cabinet Member that no vulnerable children or their families will in fact suffer from this policy? So could I have some reassurance, please?
I can reassure you confidently that we've had a number of conversations, especially in relation to this issue, which is one of the reasons that you'll see in relation to the 0 to 5 provision. And there aren't that many children, but what we tend to find is that whilst we don't have a statutory duty to supply that service, we have a number of vulnerable children there with special needs that we felt it was very much important to continue to support, and yeah, I give you my reassurance.
Thank you very much for that. Margaret.
Yes, if I could start with obviously a similar reassurance of vulnerable adults also being supported and not having anything removed from their needs. It's just clarification for me. Under the financial impact on page 1, it implies that savings are going to take place from September 2015, that's now. However, if you go over to recommendation 6, and I understand there's going to be consultation, the previous consultation is mentioned in paragraph 8.2 and 3. There's no timetable for the new consultation, which I presume is going to take place, and when the timetable of that. So I'm a little bit concerned that the savings are going to take place from this month, and yet we haven't had a consultation according to the papers, unless I've misread it. So I apologise if I've misread it.
On the specific issue of that, I'll bring in first Councillor Hall on the money, and then our Director Paul. Councillor Hall.
Just to clarify, because this also updates the Cabinet on all the various work that we've been undertaking over the last few months in terms of the whole SEN re-procurement and recommissioning. What it reflects is that from September we are seeing the benefits of that re-procurement on SEN transport. That flows through. What it also reflects is that a number of the issues like accelerating the process to independent travel, which not only obviously has a financial benefit to the Council, but more importantly improves the quality of life for young people, because if they're independent travel to and from school, they're also able to undertake all sorts of different activities independently. So it reflects that whole piece of work, as well as the in-housing of the transport service to primary school, which also started in September.
Thank you. Yeah, I heard that. Well, I'll bring Paul in as well. Paul.
Was referring to the savings that's been made through the re-procurement. In relation to your question about the adult consultation period, well noticed. So we will be ready to consult after Cabinet's made this decision. And, of course, we will consult for a period of at least 2 months. Yes, indeed.
Thank you, colleagues, for those points in the paper. Can we agree the recommendations? Thank you. Sorry, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Leader. I'm very happy to hear about the 0 to 5s. I've got one son using homeschool transport. I had another one who used homeschool transport in the 0 to 5, and that early intervention for children on the autistic spectrum is absolutely vital, and it's great to see it's going to carry on. Can I just invite you to come and talk to our autism partnership group that was reinvigorated under this administration, so you could talk to the professionals and carers and people on the spectrum about the plans for the transport.
They'll be much accepted, and vital the work that you're doing, Andrew, in this area that helps inform in terms of the policy we're developing and how we're shaping it in the future. So thank you again for that. Can we agree the recommendations, colleagues? Thank you. If we could now move on to a hugely important agenda item at 12, the forthcoming Croydon Congress. Councillor Mark Watson. Thank you, Chair. As you know, we hold two Congress meetings a year. The last one was very well received, tackled a very difficult subject of domestic abuse. It brought partners together from the voluntary sector, the faith sector and the business community to look at not only just to understand some of the issues around domestic abuse, but to look at come out with some very concrete actions that they could take to reduce domestic abuse across the borough. This Congress will take part on the 26th of November will be tackling child sexual exploitation, another hugely important and difficult subject, again bringing partners together. Like domestic abuse, it shares some of those characteristics, and the failings in other places are quite often where agencies are not joined up or working together very well, or that people have missed opportunities to intervene when they could have done. So actually putting the spotlight on that across the borough I think will be very important. A lot of child sexual exploitation, domestic abuse is also a risk factor within that, and if you looked in Rotherham, many of the children there came from homes where domestic abuse was prevalent. Croydon has a very large young population. It also has a large number of children in care, and again, they are risk factors for child sexual exploitation. So the Congress will follow a similar format as last time, try to have voices from people that have been affected by sexual exploitation, experts together, but bringing our partners together to tackle this as one borough. We can't tackle this on our own. It is very much about bringing different partners together. Some of those partners will be those people you'd expect to be there, social workers, foster carers, charities, etc. But we also want to try and engage with the business communities, taxi drivers, people that run fast food restaurants, places where young people might hang out that may have an opportunity to spot some of the signs before. This is something that we as a council absolutely have the highest priority for. I also know it's something that the police take very, very seriously here, and I think unlike Rotherham, I think the agencies here are already working together very well, but I think it's a subject whether we have risk factors, and that by working together with our communities, faith sectors and the local businesses, something that we can actually draw more attention to and try to make sure it doesn't happen here. Thank you, Mark, for the work that's happening with yourself and others in this area. Councillor Tim Pollard.
Thank you, Leader. Just to say that on this side we welcome the focus on that at the next Congress. It was an important priority of the Children and Families Partnership, which I used to chair a couple of years ago, and it's good to see that that commitment is continuing, and I'm sure it'll be a very successful focus event.
Thank you very much for those comments, and I'm sure we'll all intend to make it so. So thank you for that. Can we agree the paper, colleagues? Thank you very much. If we can move on to agenda 13.1. Any questions on 13.1? No. Could we agree the paper, colleagues? Thank you very much. If we could move to 13.2. And there is some yellow pages because we have some commercial confidentiality. But 13.2, any questions on that? Can we agree that? No. 13.3, do we have any questions on that? No, I think that then brings us to the end of the meeting. We will just have a short Part B bit where we take the commercially confidentiality part of that. So can I thank everybody for attending tonight. In terms of the rugby, can I wish all the home nations well and very much wish France well against Romania on Wednesday night, and look forward to watching that one. Thank you very much.